We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. It is finally hot in the Vancouver area, over 30 degrees Celsius. So that counts as legitimately hot, I think. It's not intolerable, but it is most definitely a little past warm. So that has finally happened over here. I know most other places throughout North America, at least, have been much, much hotter, so I won't complain too much about that. But I did have...
Or on fire.
Yes.
Those are the options.
Indeed. I did have quite the disturbing week at work, so if I'm a little bit less effervescent, it might be that.
Everybody has those weeks. I mean, not exactly your week, but everybody's got weeks where afterwards they're like, am I going to have to talk about this to a therapist? I feel like I should have to talk about this to a therapist.
Absolutely. So I was not personally involved, thankfully, with anything, but I was right in the vicinity of it. This might actually make some news. We had multiple shooting homicide happen in an area where I was in the area. I was not at all involved in it, but yeah, I was right around where that was happening, and then had a vehicle accident happen right in front of me, right in front of me. So didn't happen to me, but it was right there. So
wow.
Yeah, that's what happened.
I'll give you something to dream about at night.
It does.
I might show up in a dream or two as you're trying to fall off to sleep.
Yep.
I'm sorry that happened to you, Rob. I hope you feel better.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm okay, but yeah, if I look off somewhere, you can
if he starts getting that 1,000-yard stare, right. Is that what we're talking about now? Wow, you went straight to PTSD. He's like, no, just do not pass go, do not collect $200. Well, yes, if Rob phases out and loses his train of thought, we'll blame it on that.
That could be it. Speaking of PTSD and trauma, I finished Arcane, League of Legends, Season 1.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that segue.
Yes, well, I mean, it could easily be called Emotional Pain, the show, starring Trauma, the character. Because that is...
Is the character's name Trauma? Really?
It could be. It isn't for real, but... Okay. But if you just called them Trauma, the character, that would not be out of sorts at all. Yeah, that was a bit of a downer of a show that I probably should have watched on a different week. But it was really, really good. I have a little bit of misgivings for going into the second season, which is already in production, just because the way that the season ended, not the final episode, but the penultimate episode, they started to be a little bit more video gamey, what I assume is making the characters more like what they are in the video game, because they were definitely much more grounded, everything is elevated and heightened, very much so, but they came across as really quite grounded characters throughout the beginning and most of the middle of the show. Once we started getting to the end, I was like, this is starting to get a bit video gamey, all right? And so I have a little bit of misgivings that maybe it won't keep the same grounded, emotional tone into the second season. I hope it does. There are a gazillion characters in League of Legends and multiple cities and countries that they could expand this show into. I'm not sure if I want to leave the characters that we spent all season with, so not sure how all that would go. But given
really feels like that would be the kind of series where you would spend every season, if not every episode, but every season with one character, have them have an arc and have it be the end, and then go to a different character.
It very well could be, or at least a setting, because there were multiple storylines in this first season following multiple characters, but it was all taking place in one setting, and so they've already started to open that up towards the end of the season here. So given how excellent I thought this first season was, I will more than give them the benefit of the doubt. There is absolutely no reason they can't tell more excellent stories like this, because there's oodles and oodles of source material for them to draw upon. But yeah, it was really, really beautiful, excellent. I loved it. It's way, way up there for me. If you haven't watched Arcane on Netflix, definitely check it out. Huge recommendation for me.
All right. Well, I didn't watch crap.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I didn't watch much else either. I just
my
finished
life.
That was
these between the kids and me trying to get up early to cycle and everything else, I have a hard time staying up late. So I did watch the first episode of the newest season of the Umbrella Academy, which has been out for a hot minute. I'll be honest with you, I only vaguely remember the other 2 seasons, 3 seasons, something like that. I don't remember how many they were. Anyways, it's good. The first episode was good, so I'm excited about it. But then again, it's only the first episode. I do remember that the Umbrella Academy in my, the way my brain remembers it is good, but drags. Okay. So that's sort of my overall impression. Like, I like it, but they need to get on with it. It's just this, like it very much reminds me of Legion, that first season of Legion, where like they had no money, they spent it all on one big special effect.
They spent it all on the first episode.
They used that same special effect throughout the entire season, which I loved. The season, it does drag a little bit, but it's really quite good. I did also start with my wife, Dead to Me. Rewatched the first episode, maybe I think just 1, maybe 2 episodes of that, which has got Christina Applegate, which I'll be honest with you, I haven't really seen her in anything since whatever that movie was where she was a babysitter, maybe, or a teacher. I don't remember. Anyways, it was years ago.
Kind of ringing a bell, but yeah.
Right after Married with Children. It was not a very good thing. And I am my understanding of her, which is limited because I don't care about celebrities at all, is that she's an extremely smart, talented woman who has been absolutely pigeonholed by one very popular character that she played very early on in her
did
career.
Happen to some degree, all right. Yeah.
So I'm glad to see her in this. She's fantastic. I like both the main actresses or actors, female actors, I guess is the way to say that, in it. So I'm excited to see more. So that's good. And of course, I've been watching pretty, all the different breakdowns of the Marvel and DC things, the trailers and everything else that are coming out.
Many things announced this week. We're not going to bother detailing all that stuff. I'll just say I personally kind of feel like I'm tapping out on Marvel. Like, it's a bit much. It's a bit too much at this point. It's a bit impenetrable. It's a bit, you got to go over here, and then you got to go over here, and then there's another one here, and you got to pay attention to what came out before this, and blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't want my entertainment to be homework. It's one reason that comic books like, as much as I want to get into comic books, I'm like, can you just tell one story? Can you do that for me? Can you just have a contained story, or must I read 7 other books? Like, it just
yes. Okay, so the crossover events are always very irritating to me as a reader. Like, even when I was in middle school and high school and I was reading comic books quite regularly, I hated crossover events because I don't want to buy a Spider-Man issue,
and it's
because
just, the MCU is definitely becoming that now. It's like, you got to do your homework to get the most out of this movie that's coming out. I'm like, well, I don't want to feel like that anymore. It's no longer entertaining if it gets to that point. So I might just say the Infinity Saga was it. I enjoyed that tremendously, and I might be done.
Well, I will say, I mean, we'll have to see how some of these movies play out, because a lot of them, like the sequels and stuff, we've already seen the originals, so they're just going to build off of that, hopefully. But like even the Doctor Strange and the multiverse of Not Very Madness, that was, watching WandaVision definitely would have told you something, and actually probably informed you more of than what they told you in the movie. But they gave you enough in the movie that you could kind of follow what was going on. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to keep, I mean, I still like it because I, know a lot of these characters from, at least in passing. But I am, my wife has been well on the tap out boat train for a long time. So I certainly would not begrudge anybody. But then again, you got DC. And they're just going to keep remaking movies until one of them hits. So if you didn't like this Flash movie that probably will never come out the way things are going, then you'll get a chance to see the next one, which will be a reboot and a reboot and a reboot until they get it right. So, I'll be honest with you. So I'm a little... like I wasn't really paying attention to like Marvel, the what they call phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I wasn't really paying attention to that, but I didn't really have to because
it was just sort of marked by the Avengers movies. I mean, even though they technically said those, Avengers Age of Ultron wasn't technically the end of phase 2, and Avengers Endgame wasn't technically the end of phase. I'm like, whatever. That was it was demarcated by Avengers movies. It was pretty easy to say that.
So this feels very discombobulated what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And I read Secret Wars, and that, of course, that's like phase 6 now or 7. I don't even know what that. But I read Secret Wars back when he looked like when the Beyonder looked like a disco dude. So I'm like, how are we gonna get there from here? So I get what Marvel's doing. What Marvel's trying to do is like, we can't keep these same actors and they don't want to stay in these same roles.
Right.
They want to move on.
Yeah.
We need to replace them. How are we going to do this? Well, multiverse. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Love it. Love that idea. But
I kind of wish, because I can tell, and it made sense that they were trying to use what was already established to introduce new things. That's clearly the tact that they've taken, and that makes all the sense in the world on paper.
The handoffs.
I am now feeling as though I wish we had just started with a new batch of characters, just introduce new characters. Yes, they're in the same world, but let's not even try to hand off from previous characters, and let's just start again. Let's just do another 10-year arc, and let's just go. I'm feeling like I would have preferred that.
Yeah, you almost kind of wish that there was like, and maybe they're going to do that. I don't know. Maybe they're going to have like some sort of big cataclysmic.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about one big cataclysmic movie where it's like, everybody dies and then new people step through. Right. It's kind of like that Transformers movie. Remember the Transformers cartoon?
I do, yes.
When they killed Bumblebee and everybody was like traumatized for 10 years after that?
Optimus Prime. That's who
they did. And then they were like, oh, here's Rodimus Prime. I'm like,
yeah, that was bad.
Rodimus Prime can suck it.
Yes,
that guy sucks. He will never
Nobody
be my
was on board.
He will never be Optimus Prime, and he needs to go away. Oh my god! So you got to avoid that, right? So you're like, I just want to rip the Band-Aid off, but if you do, and it doesn't go well,
there are pitfalls either way. I could, like I say, I certainly understand the approach that was taken.
I mean, look how much anything that doesn't absolutely line up with the fanboys' expectations plays out. Like Michael B. Jordan playing the Human Torch. It's a travesty. Yeah, that one of the best young actors of this generation is playing a superhero.
Came in as Killmonger, and everyone was like, "Yes, very, very good."
So stupid. All right. Yes, we could talk about this all day. I will say the new Shazam. Did you see the new Shazam trailer? It looks.
I don't know if I saw the trailer. I think I saw the teaser like a little while ago.
Well, I don't know if it's a trailer or a teaser. It looked like a trailer. Anyways, I saw a commercial. I think it was like a YouTube commercial. All right, it looked pretty good. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, AVRant, where you can find our old episodes and show notes, as well as the Flickr album that you can follow along with all the images that we will be talking about today. Since my ability to paint a picture with words doesn't always come off the dome piece as well as it should. You can also go to facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant to watch our recording sessions.
It's fighting through the repeating.
I know. All right. Contact Rob directly. Rob at avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week. Support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com. Click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. And that'll send you to a PayPal donation site. So we want to thank Raf for that this week. Thank you very much, Raf.
Yeah, Raf, thank you for the PayPal donation. We very much appreciate your financial support.
And if you want to support us each month without having to think about it, you can go to patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can sign up to be a contributing listener. Every month, they will take some money from you, a minimum of $1, and give most of it to us. So we want to thank our 138 patrons over at patreon.com, including Dale, and Aaron. So thank you very much to our patrons.
Yeah, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, big thank you to our 138 patrons over there. Dale and Aaron, thank you for being two of them.
We want to thank, well, first of all, if you can't support us financially, find some way to support us and let us know what you did, or just do it to us, and we will mention you here. So Tim let us know that he gave us a shout out to Accessories for Less when he bought a Denon X1600H receiver from them. And Martin sent a digital code for Dread to you.
I came to the question at AVRant. I don't think it's going to work because he's in Ireland and he had a website that I don't think works in the US or Canada. So,
well, hey, it's a thought that counts.
It is absolutely a thought that counts. I'll check it out
further. One of my favorite movies.
Because I don't know if I can confirm that. I'm not totally sure. But thank you, Tim. Thank you, Martin.
All right, and we also want to thank, I want to thank Kurt. Okay. Went out to lunch with Kurt last week. Went well. Went to a nice local restaurant where I had a shrimp po' boy, and he had what he thought was a lunch-size helping of grouper, but it was clearly a dinner size.
Okay.
He ordered and a dinner size.
As long as it wasn't party platter sized, it's still all right.
No, it wasn't, and we didn't order any appetizers or anything like
okay.
that. So
you're fine.
It was a reasonable amount of food for once. I mean, this is Florida.
Thank you for. I'm guessing Kurt treated you to that lunch, so
he did.
Thank you very much, Kurt. That is very nice of you to do for Tom. Hope you
enjoyed
your slightly larger than you wanted lunch.
That's right. We had a very nice conversation, and I think we are going to get together again with our wives, because sounds like our wives would get along.
Hope
and
so.
That's the most important part. And also, well, I think we already answered his question on this. Oh, we did, but then he asked me another question, and I answered that, and he was like, well, my wife will be happy to hear it.
Okay.
So
very good.
Already making wives happy. So thank you, Kurt. We also got a Doug and Carolyn. Why did I say Carol?
I'm not
I
sure.
I got to the L and then just stopped.
Just got 2/3 of the way.
Why say the YN at the end? Just go. You get 3 consonants and 2 vowels, and I'm done with your name. It's as far as you get. Anyway, Doug and Carolyn sent photos to me with permission to use them on AV Gadgets, so thank you very much for that.
That's avgadgets.com, where Tom is the editor-in-chief, so sometimes he uses photos that are sent, but needs permission to do so to make sure he isn't going to get sued out of existence. So thank you for providing permission to use those, Doug and Carolyn.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through the ongoing pandemic. My wife currently has a cold. We're pretty sure. We're not sure. That's just why she's off right now getting tested. But we're pretty sure she has no fever. She has no sore throat. She just has a sniffle and no fever. I said no fever already. So she's just got a little sniffle and some congestion. And we also spent the entire weekend dusting and doing yard work.
Oh, yeah.
So...
Could be.
Just abundance of caution here.
Yes.
But yes, ongoing pandemic. We got notes of gratitude from Tim, who says he appreciates our approach and feels like he's among friends while listening. Thank you,
Very
Tim.
good.
You are.
Yes.
I mean, unless you're a jerk, in which case, get out. Those are your options.
It'd be weird if he's like, I don't have anything in common with those guys, but I feel like I'm among friends. So
that's right. The kind of friends that I want to stab in the back the minute I get a chance.
That's right.
Brian says we've been keeping him company while he remodels his basement and home theater. That's good. Hopefully he doesn't get halfway through a project and then here's an answer to a question and goes, crap. So, and Dale says thank you for our influence in bringing back his AV joy. He's now watched our entire back catalog of YouTube videos, and he really does mean all of them. Our main channel, my channel, he even found behind the scenes uploads at Rob's channel
that I completely forgot existed. So thanks for the reminder.
I didn't even know you had a channel.
Yeah,
I guess. Yes. And he did all that at 1x speed. He tried out the 1.5 times, but he couldn't understand us clearly. And yes, he does have lots of free time now that he's hit retirement age. So he also included a video of me, or a picture of our video.
It's got all of us, but it was when you happened to be taking up most of the screen, because that was back when we were using Google Hangouts. That was a thing that automatically uploaded itself to YouTube anyway, so that's how that all began. There's a teeny tiny little picture down there of Liz and myself as the thumbnails, because we weren't speaking at that exact moment. It's baby versions of all of us, because that's got to be going back, like 7 years at this point?
Yeah.
Maybe more? I don't know.
I still have that hat For those of you that are looking at the Flickr album or the YouTube video, I still have that hat. It's now been relegated to only yard work. I only put it on if I'm going to do exercise or sweating it a lot. And yes, my room is not that orange. I mean, it is orange, but it's not that orange. And we are in the process of cleaning it up so we can paint it. Because my wife wants to paint other rooms in the house, and if I'm like, I'm painting those, I'm painting this. So we have been cleaning up, and that's what the dusting was all about, was trying to clean up rooms enough to get them ready to paint. Jonathan says he's been enjoying our movie and TV show reviews.
Hooray.
I should watch some more stuff, I guess. Aaron and Doug and Carolyn say, great podcast. We haven't steered them wrong yet. So, notes of gratitude from Tim, Brian, Dale, Jonathan, Aaron, Doug, and Carolyn. So thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. I'll say the names one more time. Tim, Brian, Dale, Jonathan, Aaron, Doug, and Carolyn. Thank you all very much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us. The notes of encouragement are very much appreciated. So a big, big thank you to you, and a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Right, in the news, Emotiva was at the Texas Audio Roundup. I'm telling you, the only place I want to be less than Florida is probably Texas, but whatever.
I mean, it was Austin, so at least it's Austin.
Right,
Texas.
it was one bastion of culture. I have family that lives in Dallas, and I am and Houston for that matter. So I am being a bit facetious. I would definitely go to Texas.
It's a big place, Texas. It's a big place. Not every person is the same.
That's right. And all of West Texas is completely unoccupied by people because it's a desert. Anyways, Texas Audio Roundup, and they previewed their new BasX MR-1, a 13.2 channel AV receiver, which they say, I'm gonna just,
they said it.
We're not saying it. They say should be available in about 2 months.
Yep.
Now, is that 2 months on Earth or 2 months on Jupiter? No one knows. Could be Pluto. You don't know, because this is how these
there
things
likely
work.
will be a span of 2 months at some point where it is available.
I bet it won't be before 2 months. So,
Indeed.
I think the smart money is at 2 months or more. For under $2,000, 13.2 channel AV receiver, so not processor.
That's correct.
Oddly,
amplifiers built into this one.
$2,000, under $2,000, sorry. It's basically their $1,000 BasX MC1 Pre-Pro with 11 channels of amplification built in. The front 3 channels are more powerful, rated at 175 watts, while the remaining 8 channels are rated at 100 watts. You could add 2 more channels of external amplification to get a 13-channel setup. As far as we know, it's still HDMI 2.0, and it uses EMO-Q for auto setup. EMO-Q for auto setup.
Not Dirac. That is not part of this. It is the BasX lineup, so this is not their X series where they step up in all of the features. It looks
bigger than a normal receiver. Is it bigger than a normal receiver? It looks taller.
It's a pretty beefy boy, but I mean, it's got 11 channels of Emotiva amplification built into that thing. So that's where that's coming from. The MC1 Pre-Pro, which is pretty much the processing part of this thing, is only a 1 RU rack unit, so it's quite svelte. It's quite small, so that is definitely amplification taking up the size inside of that MR-1 chassis. Oh, those letters. Try not to get them mixed up.
Whatever. No Dirac, though, is kind of disappointing, I suppose.
Yeah.
I guess it probably has a full set of pre-outs so that you can add.
I would imagine. I would be shocked if it does not.
Our second and final piece of news, because nothing else happened this week of any note whatsoever. James Cameron's Lightstorm Entertainment will be re-releasing updated versions of Avatar and Titanic in theaters. If I can tell you anything I definitely like when they re-release things that have been updated. Like when they did that to Star Wars, I can't tell you how excited I was.
I mean,
they changed
as far
scenes.
as I know, it's not content updating, it's format updating. With
the exception of the whole who shot first thing, the very first round of updates they did with Star Wars was not bad.
The enhanced version is my favorite version.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yes.
Not instead of walking past white walls in the Empire Strikes Back on the Cloud City, they walk by windows. And
that
that's
was special
kind of
edition, though. It wasn't enhanced version. Didn't do that. Enhanced version was just cleaning up what was originally there without changing any of the dialogue or adding scenes or any editing. That was my favorite version.
Yeah. Anyways, They're working with Pixelworks and their TrueCut motion technology to create 4K HDR high frame rate versions of the two movies. Exact specifications on the frame rate and release dates were not announced yet.
I mean, one would guess that next year is the 25th anniversary for Titanic, so one would guess it was then. One would assume they would try to bring out the first Avatar in this updated format just prior to the sequel coming out at the end of this year. Right. So one would guess that this is going to be Christmas of this year and probably summer of next year. But yeah, I mean, there are still... Most theaters are not able to show HDR and high frame rate, so it's going to be a limited number of theaters that are able to take advantage of this. It's funny because the reaction amongst the home theater enthusiast crowd whenever they hear that something is going to be in high frame rate is often to immediately roll your eyes or go, ugh. And yet, every time I've watched a high frame rate movie, I have not hated it. I haven't loved it. It's still in question mark territory for me because it's still so rare. But I have not hated it. That has never been my reaction to watching the high frame rate version in high frame rate. So I don't have a problem with them trying this out. The TrueCut motion, they call it motion grading, like how you can do color grading in post-production. Now they're talking about motion grading in post-production. So this isn't just interpolating new frames and letting the algorithm do it and not touching it. You are interpolating new frames because these were originally shot on film, those two, or Avatar wasn't film, but it was shot at 24 frames per second originally. So they are interpolating new frames, but then they are doing a motion grading pass of it in post-production so that they can choose what the look of it is. So if you're in a very fast, rapidly cut action sequence, they can make sure that that looks clearer and doesn't have any strobing effect, which is exaggerated when you go into HDR as well. The strobing effect of the low frame rate can be exaggerated in HDR, so they're like, well, we can clean all that up, and when it's moving super fast, you're not going to notice soap opera effect, and then when we do a slow pan, we can make sure that there's no judder or stutter in it, but without making it have that weird, overly smoothed effect. So it's almost like variable frame rate in a sense. I mean, the deliverable will be at a fixed frame rate for the projectors in the theaters, but it's almost as though what's going in there, they can choose when frames are repeated or when they're overlaid on top of each other to add blur that wasn't there in the original photograph. So there's lots that they can do with that. And being James Cameron, if anybody's actually going to put in the time and effort to get it the way he truly wants it to be, it'll be him. Assuming future movies that make use of it might not have the budget or the time allotted to them and might be a bit more of an automated process. But yeah, I'm not against this. I'm curious to see how it turns out.
I feel like high frame rate is like the Nickelback of home theater.
Or the Imagine Dragons
to hate
now.
it. Yeah. People just hate it because other people have said to hate it.
Right.
And I mean, like I said, I have never really seen high frame rate other than the fake stuff that, the motion smoothing stuff that you can get on.
That I do not like. I do not like the motion smoothing on your television. I will unequivocally say I dislike that.
Yes. But I'm, whatever. I don't like that they're re-releasing it to theaters. I think they should just...
Go straight to home?
Well, I don't necessarily go straight to home, but I think before Avatar and maybe not Titanic, I mean, they should all come out on 4K discs so that we can watch them at home before the movies come out. So yes, you can re-release them in theaters. I'm not going to go. Of all the movies I have ever seen in my entire life, Avatar has got to be one of the few that I never need to see again and still remember every bit of the plot.
Yeah.
It has been done so many times. That movie has been done many times that all you have to remember is the flying dinosaur thing, that he upgrades at the end and becomes like Super King guy. You got to remember, unobtainium. Mm-hmm. You got to remember there's a big freaking tree that's all connected to everything, and that whatever. I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the only unique parts of the entire thing. Everything else was a story that I've seen done a bajillion times before. So I'm not gonna. I saw Avatar in 3D because everybody told me I needed to experience good 3D, and that was it. So I did, and went okay. And that was the last time I went voluntarily to a 3D movie. So I'm not going to go see this. And certainly not. I saw Titanic in the theater as well. Yeah. And I'm not going to go see that again either. So they can re-release it a million times. I'm never going to see it. Comments from listeners, as opposed to random people on the street. Vince and Karl had thoughts about how to 100% black out a window. Vince vouches for Blackout easy window covers that you cut to size and adhere to the window frame with Velcro. They appear white from the outside and you hide the black surface on the inside with a rectangular window coverings, blinds, curtains, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you have in there. Two starting sizes, 36 by 48 for $49 and 45 by 66 for $67 are available on Amazon. Vince says they are easy to install, are unnoticeable from the outside, and work perfectly, whereas his previous blackout curtains let in a little bit of light into the room. Great. I think that's a fine solution. Whatever. I don't care. Karl suggested using a roller blind system that can be installed within a window well. He says they use some of them at the college campuses where he works, and they provide 100% light blockage while easily lifting out of the way whenever you want and appearing white both on the inside and the outside. The installation process is quite a bit more involved, but not difficult, and you end up with a cleaner, permanent installation. That sounds like you have to have perfectly square window openings, which I do not.
Well, I mean, so, you can caulk in any gap that's around the edge, so you could shim and caulk if you got a little non-perfectly square. Yeah.
Tim wanted to mention that the Denon X1600H and the other models from that year got a firmware update some time ago that added Bluetooth output so you can send audio wirelessly from a receiver to a pair of Bluetooth headphones. Rob Preeley mentioned this as a feature advantage of the X1700H over the 1600H, but the 16800H has it now thanks to the update. So, I mean, I guess that's something you're interested in.
It is in the online manual, which is one advantage of having online manuals. They can be updated over the print ones, and it is definitely there under like added features that were not there upon launch, but very nice that they were able to do that via firmware update. So that is good to be aware of.
And for those of you that caught the AV Gadgets Dolby breakdown of the new number of features and stuff based on what we talked about last week, we went through that and wrote that up, and somebody immediately commented, how come you linked to the old 2018 manual? I'm like, white paper or whatever. I'm like, it's the same one. They just added to the end of it. That's all they did.
I mean, that's the one that shows up when you go from their website. So
yeah, I mean, they just they updated the document, but they didn't change the year at the top, to indicate that it's revision to 2022, which is what they should have done. They should just put 2022 updated 2022 right underneath the 2018, or just delete the 2018. And say
definitely in 2018 the whole 11.1.8 setup was not in there.
Not there,
but you can see in the PDF it is there. So something.
So if you click on that, and you see the 2018 at the top. Just keep scrolling. It's a very long document. You will get there.
Yeah.
Kris, these are the questions, of course. Kris, Kaleidescape has been garnering a bit more attention lately. It just means you ran into a couple of articles about it. Believe me, they're
and they're on YouTube and they're on the podcasts. They're making an effort. Get their name out there.
One claim is that their picture and sound quality is better than Ultra HD Blu-rays. What's their take on that? He'd be willing to consider one if the quality really is better. I don't see how it can be better unless they got it directly from the studio.
They do. They get the mezzanine file, which is like 2 steps removed from the master, but a couple of steps above a home release for sure. And then they do their own compression on there. So, I mean, my take on it is they often do have the very best available version for home consumers, but they do not always have the very best version. So it's one of these things where, unfortunately, we can't just point you at a format or service and say, that is the one format or service that always 100% of the times has the best version of a movie. If it's offered on that format or service, it's going to be the best. It's not quite that cut and dry. There are movies that Kaleidescape simply does not have on their service, so obviously they can't have the best version if they just straight up don't have the movie. But for the movies that they have Ultra HD, HDR with Atmos versions of some movies that are not available in those formats anywhere else. So in those instances, they definitely have the best version that's available to home consumers. And then for the ones that are available both on Kaleidescape and on Ultra HD Blu-ray, it's like I would venture to say most of the time they do have the slightly superior version, again, because they're starting with the mezzanine files and allowed to do their own compression on it. So they very often do. Now, there are some caveats to things there. They tend to cater more to the projector crowd, and whenever possible, they tend to format their movies in CinemaScope format. So if it is a movie like The Dark Knight that switches aspect ratios, the Kaleidescape version won't do that. It won't have the switching aspect ratios. They do not have the IMAX enhanced versions of the Marvel movies, because rather than having the taller aspect ratio, they stick with the CinemaScope ratio. So if aspect ratio is a thing where you're like, I want to see as much of the original image as I can, including the taller aspect ratio, Kaleidescape as it is today probably isn't going to be your top choice there. So, like I say, there's the most of the time I would say, yes, they have the best version, but you still need to sort of double check. It's not quite set it and forget it, and they don't necessarily have everything that might be available on some other services. So it's still difficult for me to say, yes, you should spend the thousands, and it is still thousands and thousands of dollars. And I've seen people criticize because they go, well, if you just look at the hardware, you know, what is the box that they're selling you? It doesn't cost thousands and thousands of dollars to manufacture that. Of course it doesn't. What they are doing is subsidizing the cost of having to license all this content directly from the studios. Kaleidescape is a small company. You know, like to you and I who you know don't own our own business, or if we do, it's definitely a small business. You know, they're a big company to us, but like compared to other movie distribution companies, they are a small company for sure. And they are going straight to the studios and signing licensing deals directly with them. So that costs them a lot of money. The studio isn't saying, oh, hey, just give us a percentage cut of every movie that people buy. They're saying, no, you pay us up front to even get access to whatever library of movies we allow you to have access to. And then we also want a cut of everything that is purchased on your service. So it costs Kaleidescape a lot of money on the back end. It's why they went bankrupt before and then managed to get back into things. But, you know, it's not as though they're charging you for what it costs to manufacture the box that they're selling you. There's a huge amount of that cost is going towards the back end of the system.
That's always a ludicrous claim to me that people will make, that, you know, oh, I can see that this is
I
this
could
only
build
costs
a
this
home
much.
theater PC that's more powerful than this for less money. Yes, absolutely you could. But that would not have access to all these movies now, would it? Right? And if you tried to go to the studio, it would cost you way, way more than a Kaleidescape. So I'm like, yeah.
Here's the thing. So as a podcast, as a person maybe, but as a podcast in general, why don't we recommend Kaleidescape more often? Because if it does occasionally, and for many people just occasionally is enough, has the very best quality, why wouldn't we recommend it? Because I would never buy it, like in a million years. I just wouldn't do it. And
if
the
it
reason
cost
is I'm
a
just too
lot
cheap.
less, it would be a no-brainer. So it's that value proposition.
I've got no problems with people who do value
That's
that,
right.
though. That's the thing.
The other thing is they sometimes...
Then go ahead and buy it. You know, the same thing with the people who are like, I want a massive subwoofer. Go ahead. I must have cut out.
I was going to say, yeah, we did had a Skype glitch there, but I was going to say that they sometimes, quite frequently, have movies available before they're available, certainly on disc, and sometimes even a week or two available ahead of when they show up on, say, like Apple movies, where you can purchase it that way. So sometimes you're getting access earlier in addition to the higher quality. So if that's worth a lot to you, so it's almost one of those where I think if you look at the price and go, that's not too bad, I'm okay with that, then you'd probably be very, very happy with it. If you're looking at it and go, whoa, that's really expensive, then it's not really for you, because you can get all the movies on like Apple movies in pretty darn good quality. Is it Kaleidescape quality? Is it even Ultra HD Blu-ray disc quality? Not quite, if you're purchasing them through Apple Movies or purchasing them through Vudu or something like that. But, for the convenience and the cost and the ease and everything like that, if you look at the Kaleidescape price and kind of bulk at it, I would say, you don't have to. Don't worry about it. Don't worry too much about the fear of missing out that you're not getting the very, very best. But I think a lot of people for the that we talked to on this podcast, they are in that little bit of in between. It's like it would be a stretch, it would hurt a little bit to pay all that money for the Kaleidescape, but they are the exact type of person who cares about the very, very best quality. It's like that's the tough value proposition. We can't really tell you for sure one way or the other because I see value there. But I don't think it's quite enough for me to go, well, you just got to do it. Forgo all the other upgrades in your home theater and get the Kaleidescape first, because I'm like, it's not quite that good, but it definitely is compelling in its own way. So I'm sorry I can't give a more concrete answer than that, Kris.
Right.
But yeah, hopefully that's enough to... Yeah.
The inconsistency is the biggest problem, right? If you could say, well, it's going to cost you this much, but then you will know that every movie you get from there is always going to be the best.
Right.
Then it would be easy. It would be easier to say.
It usually is.
Yeah, but then you have to do research. Yeah. All right. So those of you that are listening to this podcast right now, the audio version, or I guess any of the versions, almost certainly you're going to start hearing a lawnmower, because I can hear my son getting the lawnmower out right now. So I apologize in advance if that bothers you, if it triggers you or whatever, because you should be doing the lawn instead of doing this. If you're already doing the lawn, well, I guess now you get to hear it whether you want it or not. Kris is hoping Tom can weigh in, since his questions are specifically about living in Florida, not really AV related. Kris and his wife currently live just outside of St. Louis. Stay there.
Well, that's a bit of a spoiler.
They've talked about potentially moving to Florida for about 7 years now. They're big Disney fans, and they enjoy being close to Disney World. Back in their current place, the city council just approved the construction of a processing plant less than a mile from their house, and they aren't thrilled about putting up with the disruption, so they're strongly considering moving right now. He knows Tom said St. Petersburg specifically is nice, but he's also heard that could be a big difference literally from one street to the next. Nice neighborhood for one block, then high crime the next. Could Tom share any insight about that? That is old. That is a little bit old.
Okay.
Advice. And there are still neighborhoods that are like that here. But any real estate agent worth their salt in this area would be able to let you know one way or the other, and it'd be very easy for you to figure out. The main thing you should need to worry about if you are moving to Florida, full stop, I don't care where you are moving to Florida, even if you think that you're far away from water, you need to worry about flooding more than anything, because we are barely above sea level in most of the parts of the state. So which almost every city, whatever, has some sort of registry for that you can look up for every single house that you would look for here in Florida about any insurance claims that were made. And so like my house has never had a flood claim on it since the 50s when it was built. So it's never had does that mean it's never flooded? It could have, but maybe they paid for it out of pocket or they repaired it themselves, but there wasn't an insurance claim. We have, and even when a quarter of my neighborhood flooded back during that, whatever that tropical storm was that we talked about on this podcast, my house didn't flood. It got real close, but it didn't flood. So that's the number one thing that I would warn you about, that people don't think of, because they're like, oh, it's beautiful and blah, 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 blah. No, always check the roofs. Always check the roofs and check them. And even if you think they might be okay, make sure that your home inspector checks the roofs. Always check to see if there's been any flood claims about it, and triple check for termites, because in Florida, termites are an inevitability. You are going to have them, and like every house has been tented in this, at one point or another around here because of termites. So you just be careful of those things. So he says, any other advice Tom would have for areas in Florida that may be a bit closer to Disney World? No.
Okay.
So Disney World is in Orlando, and Orlando is a hellscape as far as I'm concerned. And in fact, the problem with Disney World isn't so much that it's in Orlando or anything else. It's just that there's always an insane amount of traffic around Disney World. Like going down I-4, which is the highway that goes right in front of Disney World, is always a parking lot, no matter what time of day, no matter what. There are, every neighborhood I've ever been in, I have friends that live in Orlando, and I have had them lived in multiple places. There are certainly very nice areas in Orlando that feel a little bit more I won't say rural, but a little bit more homey and less like track housing. I mean, there's certainly neighborhoods like that you can find in and around the Disney World area. I don't live in any of those. If you're looking for a small town feel, Lakeland it's not farmland, but it is. I mean, its center of town is like 2 miles, maybe square. That they're like they have like one big building. I don't remember. It's a little bit bigger than that, but it's very small town there, and that would be within 30 minutes of Disney World, maybe an hour of Disney World.
About how long does it take to go from St. Petersburg to Disney World, or at least Orlando? It's over an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 2. If the traffic's not too bad, you can probably get there in 2 hours from here.
Okay.
So it's an hour to Lakeland, an hour more past that to get to Disney World. And Disney World's on this side, on our side of Orlando. So if it's actually, in my mind, and I might be a little bit wrong about this, but Disney World is on the west side of Orlando, and we are further, of course, west than that. So it's a bit of a drive, but like I said, it's always a bit of a headache getting there. They keep talking about building a high-speed rail to go through that area, and I'm telling you, I wish they would, just so that the people going to Disney World would have a way of getting there really easily, not using cars. He says, just to keep this a little bit more home theater related, is there anything on that front that sticks out as a concern or something Kris should prepare for when it comes to putting a home theater in a new place in Florida?
Don't expect a basement.
There are no basements. No, that's not it. So your best shot at yes. So there are no basements. If it's a newer construction, it's especially in my area, it's going to be raised, and there's going to be garages on the bottom floor and non-living areas on the bottom floor, and then the living areas will start one floor up from that because of housing construction restrictions right now. Because of flooding. But people do build things down there they're not supposed to build. So if you see that, just know, and you put your theater in this bottom room, you're risking having the entire thing flood. And it won't be covered by, none of that will be covered by insurance, your homeowner's insurance.
Because it wasn't supposed to be a living space.
It wasn't supposed to be a living space. The thing I would worry about mostly, as far as on the home theater front, is making sure that your electrical panel is updated and well maintained. You want to have somebody really look at it, and that is because especially given the age of some of the houses around here, like there are neighborhoods in this like the old Northeast and stuff like that. Those houses are like from the 20s and 30s, and they're beautiful, and a lot of them have been renovated and updated, but the electrical panel sometimes can be quite let's put it away. When I had my electrical panel updated, the guy electrician went, oh, like I had wires coming out and going into the ground that were never there before when he was done. So there was definitely some things I should have done. Be prepared for brownouts. Be prepared for things like that, and check how the age of your AC, roof, AC, flooding, electrical panels, that sort of thing. I mean. And it is hotter than you think. Okay, don't come down here in February and be like, it is beautiful here, I can't wait to live here forever. Believe me, it is hotter than you think. It was, when I woke up this morning at 6 a.m., it was 80 degrees outside. Feels like, I think it's a 90 or 92. And by the hottest part of the day, it's going to feel like well over 100 degrees, and it's going to be 80% humidity, and there'll be 90 something degrees outside. Infinite Gary.
So just to warn you, this is 2 weeks worth of Infinite Gary questions, so let's not belabor any of them, because there's quite a few here, and they don't need to be super long answers, but I want to get to all the rest coming up, so we'll go through.
Gary decided to do some experiments with his Marantz SR6011 receiver in his spare bedroom that he uses for his Atmos speaker setup. He was mostly using external amplification before, and he wanted to hear what the Marantz could do, powering its maximum of 9 speakers on its own, plus 2 channels of external amplification for the rearmost Atmos speakers only. And one problem came up immediately. He uses Nordost speaker wire for his front speakers in the room, and it has permanently attached spade connectors. The binding posts in the Marantz have plastic guards that make it impossible to fit in the spades in there. Why do they do that? Why do you want to use spades? His other gear just has regular binding posts that easily let you use spade connectors. He did a workaround by jamming one of the prongs in the spade hole of the spade into the hole where the banana plug would go. Is that all right as a temporary solution? Yeah, you're just testing things out. As long as the electrical connection is made and it doesn't fall out and short something out as it's doing so, it's fine.
I wouldn't want to keep it that way permanently. The plastic guard is there because they're assuming that most people will actually use bare speaker wire.
That's right.
So rather than just having an open peg where the bare speaker wire could quite easily slip out if that screw came loose whatsoever, they put
just
the guard
one strand as they're tightening it down. It just keeps everything. It just keeps everything. I agree with you. Those little plastic guards are annoying to work
They are
around.
very annoying. Yes.
Yeah, but
I agree.
That being said, they are less annoying than having to buy new speakers.
But if you do want a more permanent solution for, you already have speaker wire that has spades permanently attached, you have binding posts like these where the most convenient by far would be to be able to use banana plugs, there are spade to banana plug adapters, which just look like a screw-in binding post on one end and a banana on the other. And that they are not expensive whatsoever. You can grab them at Amazon, and that would definitely be a way for you to convert your spades to bananas if this is a more permanent situation.
He reran Audyssey. It says Revel Performa F52, should be B52, front towers to full band. His Revel Ultima Voice 2 center to 150 hertz, I guess crossover. His Revel M105 surrounds to 60 hertz. His Dynaudio Focus 160 surround backs to 40 hertz, and his two pairs of upward firing PSB Atmos modules to 110 and 100 hertz. That seems really bizarre. None of those numbers line up with the specified minus 3D points on any of those speakers. And they don't match the results you got before. Can we explain? Your room, your microphone position, and random noises. Those are the explanations. Okay, your room makes a big difference. The placement of the speakers make a big difference. And then add into that the placement of your microphone and any extraneous noises that may have come in during one of those chirps can all add into this, and run it again and you'll get different numbers. What does it mean? It doesn't mean a thing. Just change the crossovers to what you want to change them to. Set your fronts to small because that's what you should be doing, and Bob's your uncle. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, the auto setup is it's running the sweeps, it's taking the measurements, and it's simply looking on the low end for where is it 3 decibels quieter than the average of this sweep. That's really all it's looking for. So like in the case of that center, which clearly that center is entirely capable of playing lower than 150 hertz. It just happens that, like Tom said, because of relative speaker location, microphone location, room acoustics, it happened to be that maybe there was actually a bit of a hump at like 200 hertz or 250 hertz, which would be quite common in most rooms. There's very often a room mode right around the 250 hertz mark, so maybe the microphone just happened to be where that was artificially boosted by the room acoustics. Therefore, at 150 hertz, it's 3 decibels quieter than that, or probably more than 3 decibels quieter than that, and then below that, maybe substantially more so than that artificial hump. But unfortunately, it doesn't know that the artificial hump was a room thing. It's just like, oh, that's how loud the speaker is at 250 hertz, and then it gets quite a bit quieter than that, an octave lower than, so it sets the crossover a bit too high. But yeah, that's the explanation for why it can happen. It's not based on the capabilities of your speakers. It's what the microphone happens to detect at that particular time.
He went into the manual speaker setup and changed the global speaker crossover to 80 with all speakers set to small. Is there any chance the Marantz will revert those bizarre crossover frequencies somehow? What determines whether it uses the automatic settings or its manual settings each time it turns it on? If you change it, it's changed. Full stop for everything.
Yeah, when it comes to distances and crossover settings, if you do those in the manual speaker setup, it sticks with what you did manually. There won't be any reversion unless you manually change it back to what it was. Those settings will stick. The type of settings that can change with a power on, power off are the things that you would find by pressing the option menu on the remote control. Those bring up temporary settings and very often input specific settings. But if you actually go into the full setup menu, into the manual speaker setup, the crossover and delays, distance settings, crossover settings, you change those manually, those stick.
Yeah. So the trim levels that you would have set from the manual setup would stick as well, just so that's clear. It's just if you go into one of those, from the remote bass boost whatever thing. It'll boost it while you're watching and then turn it back when you turn it off. He tried it with Audyssey Dynamic EQ off. He watched the Ultra HD Blu-ray of Blade Runner and found that to his taste. About minus 20 on the master volume was as loud as he cared to go. The way we talk about Dynamic EQ, the bass ought to have been pretty weak at this setting with Dynamic EQ off, right? But the bass sounded strong and forceful to him. Then he turned Dynamic EQ on and kapow! It was like the sound had been given a steroid shot. But the bass sounds this much, but if the bass sounds this much louder with dynamic EQ on, how is that preserving creator's intent versus just playing everything back at a lower volume level? A lower volume level.
Like turning everything down and just keeping it all even, linearly, it's all that much quieter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of answered your own question here, to be honest with you. You're like, there's a lot more bass here when I turned the dynamic EQ on.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that preserving the director's intent? Because that's how loud the bass was supposed to be in relative to everything else, based on
it's not how loud it was supposed to be relative, but it is audible now. There is bass that became inaudible or close to inaudible when dynamic EQ was off. Now, the bass that would have become inaudible at minus 20 is audible once again, but make no mistake, dynamic EQ is a compromise, right? If you want to hear the full creator's intent, you have to listen at reference volume level. That was the creator's intent. That's how they mastered it. That's the way that they intended for you to hear it if you want to stick to that. As soon as you turn the master volume down, you have gone away from the original creator's intent to some degree. Dynamic EQ is a compromise. It is saying we will at least keep everything audible. It is not exactly the relative levels, because the bass, by having to be that much louder just to remain audible, by definition, it is now, if you just subtract one volume level from the other, it is louder relative to the mid-range frequencies than it would have been at reference volume. At reference volume, the bass probably wouldn't be a whole lot louder than it is with dynamic EQ on, but the mid-range would have been louder and the treble would have been louder. Those things are allowed to be turned down to the minus 20 point that you set your master volume, but the bass has to be kept at this higher level just to remain audible. So why did you still have strong, forceful bass even with dynamic EQ off? Well, because a lot of what we perceive as bass is quite a bit higher in frequency than you might think. It's
all up like 60 to 80 hertz.
Well, higher than that, honestly. Like when we hear bass in music, that's often 200 hertz, 250 hertz. That is bass, and we perceive it as bass. We don't consider that a mid-range note. Absolutely not. It sounds like bass. It sounds like pretty deep bass. You get down to 150 hertz, that sounds like deep bass when we're talking about, an instrument playing a note like that. That's a really low note. So yeah, don't be mistaken that, when we're trying to keep 20 hertz audible, we are terrible at hearing 20 hertz. Dynamic EQ has to do a lot to keep 20 hertz audible.
Right. Everybody seems to think that this kick you in the chest bass and the bass that they hear, like, I'm used to having a really strong bass and my subwoofer isn't giving me really strong bass. We'll get a subwoofer that plays lower. That is not the answer. That's almost never the answer.
If you're perceiving the bass as notes, it's probably over 100 hertz.
Yeah, it's not even your subwoofer. Your subwoofer is not the issue.
That's
here. Right. All right. So relying on audio memory, which everybody says is like 3 seconds, but I cannot for the life of me find a direct reference for this. I mean, believe me, I have tried. If anybody, I've said this before in this podcast.
I know it's been mentioned in the Harman stuff, so there's probably some audio engineering society.
There needs to be a link that I can link to from my articles, because I'm not making that claim because in any of my articles, because I can't link to the
that whole turntable system they have for speakers over at Revel and in the Harman Labs, like they did that because of the audio memory being so short thing. So there's got to be some reference to it from some of their writings.
I'm sure it's short. That's not an issue. The problem is this 3 second claim. I want to see something.
Email Todd Welty. We have his email. He could probably point you to it.
Anyways, so relying on audio memory, comparing the Marantz powering 9 speakers itself with an Outlaw amp powering just the 2 rear Dolby Atmos speakers, he actually thinks it sounds a bit better when he was using the Outlaw plus some Emotiva amps to power all the speakers externally. I'm sure there's no psychological explanation for that whatsoever. I'm sure that's all.
Well, you would think it would be the opposite. You would think that you would expect the all external amps to sound better if it was, bias based upon that. No, he's like, no, letting the Marantz power as much as it is capable, he thinks actually sounds a bit better.
Right. And of course, that's Audyssey versus Audyssey rerun too, right? So you reran it. So if we were to switch to a processor with DRAC, and even went so far as to hire an audio calibrator to dial in to perfection, it wouldn't be realistic to do an instant A/B comparisons. How do you actually evaluate which is better, particularly if you are manually adjusting the target curves? He feels like all of this room correction EQ stuff leads to a bit of conundrum because, for example, he has 3 different multi-channel setups in his house. That's 3 different rooms using different electronics and speakers in each, but all of the rooms have been acoustically treated and carefully calibrated. So, but if he listens to the same recording in all 3 rooms, each one sounds a bit different. So how do you know which one comes closest to sounding 100% as intended? You don't. Unless you are sitting there in the actual studio where it was mixed,
right?
Which we don't even actually, I've seen some studios where I'm like, is this actually where they record things? Because where they mix stuff? Because that's not what I envisioned. I thought that they would have more room treatments, less foam crap all over the walls and stuff like that.
It can be pretty regular looking rooms sometimes.
Yeah. So, I don't know how you want this. I don't know that there is an objective truth here that we can say.
This is the issue in audio. It's not like video where we have really strict, specific standards that you can measure and say, not only did I hit the target, you can say exactly how much you missed it if you did. We don't have that in audio. Right. Now, the closest we can get to is there is a signal. It is an electronic signal. You can look at the waveform of that signal. You can then measure the response with a microphone that arrives at your seat in response to that signal. And you can say, okay, is what arrived at my seat exactly the same as that electronic signal? You overlay those things. Is there deviation? Is there significant deviation? So in that sense, you can say, well, is what arrived at my ears equal to the analog of the electronic signal that is the recording? So to some extent, that's playing the sweeps or playing the pink noise, measuring with something like Room EQ Wizard, and confirming that way that at the very least, the response that actually reaches your seat is equal to the target curve that you set. That much you would certainly want to look at if you have a professional calibrator who's manually adjusting Audyssey or manually adjusting Dirac or any of the other systems, Anthem Room Correction or Trinov or whatever it might be. You would hope that they would then bust out their separate measurement microphone and separate measurement software and take an after measurement, a genuine after measurement, and see whether what arrives at the seats is equal to the target curve that you were aiming for. But that's about the best we can do because we can't actually say, well, we adjusted for this slight house curve. The research says this is what people prefer. I know that I prefer it when I listen to it this way versus ruler, flat, or some other target curve. And yet, is that exactly what the content creator intended? Is that exactly what they heard in their mastering suite?
Right.
Unknown. And we can't say by how much we were off. So you have to let that go a little bit out of your mind that there is an objective accuracy in audio. But that's about the best we can do.
Even if you did that, you would actually need one of those heads, those recording binaural heads.
But there's 3 different standardized heads, and then some people don't use any of those 3 standardized heads. They use some other head. So
yeah, you would need your own head. Right. You would need your own head modeled and put it there with the 2 microphones, right? And one in each ear, and then you would have to measure each to make sure that it was exactly what you thought you should.
Right.
I mean, there is no way of
good luck.
Yeah. This is why I think good enough is I get to good enough way before here.
Oh, yes.
Like way before you get to this question.
This is a thought experiment for Gary. We get it.
He was curious if 7.2.6 would sound any different than 7.2.4 since he recently got 2 pairs of PSP upward firing modules. He already owned 2 pairs of Klipsch upward firing modules. He figured, why not? Mm-hmm. But of course, he discovered there's no way to set the Rant 6011, SR6011, to use 6 Atmos speakers instead of 4, and he doesn't have any intention of buying a way more expensive receiver or pre-pro to try out 6 Atmos modules. He didn't just overlook something that would make 6 Atmos speakers possible, did he? He went and buy 2 more receivers? No, didn't think so. Any persuasive thoughts that would make paying a lot more money to try 6 Atmos speakers worthwhile? I don't think trying 4 Atmos speakers is all that worthwhile. But the fact that you're already there, at least not with the Atmos upward firing modules, the fact that you're already there and you already have the ability and you have the speakers, fine, knock yourself out. But I mean, if you had in-ceiling speakers that were properly placed and everything, I would say this would help steer things around above you when they do go above you, the few times they do go above you, and the few movies that they actually go above you. Like, A Quiet Place might sound a little bit more realistic.
But I mean, honestly, in Gary's setups, not only does Gary just have one row of seats, he just has one seat.
One seat,
right. He just has the one seat. So, I mean, he can actually do the Dolby diagram. He can point all of his speakers right at that one seat. There's no occlusion to worry about. There's no other seats to be concerned whether they're getting the good frequency response. He's just got the one seat. In his Atmos room is a pretty small room. There is no compelling reason, Gary, for you to spend extra money just to get to try 6 overheads. Absolutely not. That isn't where you need to go. You're getting about as good as it gets with the 4 because of your room size and your single seat.
You could say that, it's akin to having a phantom top middle.
Right.
Which you might think to yourself, oh, well, I'd much rather have a center channel than having a phantom center channel. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, but you're facing those speakers with your ears who are designed to hear things that you are facing. And these things are above and behind you, not optimally placed. And if you have ever, heard a sound behind you, the first thing you do is turn your face towards it so that you can hear it better, so that you can locate it. Because you know it's behind you, you're not exactly sure where until you turn your head and you start like echolocating the thing with your ears, basically, along with your eyes, of course.
So there was no setting missed. As of right now, the only receivers and processors that let you go to 6 overhead speakers are the ones that can process more than 11 speakers total. You have to get to the ones that can do 13 or 16 or 15 rather speakers total before you get any that allow you to go to 6 instead of 4. The ones that stop at 11, they stop at 4 overheads.
While he was messing around in the settings, he did notice that he could have front Dolby plus back Dolby or front Dolby plus surround Dolby as the settings for his 4 Atmos modules. And the on-screen diagram shows the modules either on top of the surround back speakers or the surround speakers, respectively. Is one preferred over the other? I mean, I'd put them on the surround backs.
And that is, Dolby actually has that. That's part of that white paper. They do have a preference. If you have surround back speakers available, a 7-speaker floor-level setup, they prefer for you to have the rearmost upward fire modules on the surround back speakers as opposed to the surround speakers. The surround Dolby is there as an option because, of course, sometimes you're stopping at 5 floor-level speakers. So you're not going to have surround back speakers on which to place the back Dolby speakers. You will then have surround Dolby speakers because that is, of course, the next best thing.
So, lastly, we've mentioned how doubling the watts leads to a 3 dB increase in volume. He's never really fully understood this. Can we explain it in layman's terms? He just knows if he wants it louder, he turns up the volume dial. Well, remember you have your sensitivity rating, right? So let's pretend it's 90 dB, 1 watt, 1 meter.
Okay.
So if you're sitting 1 meter away, which you're not, or you might be. Some of these rooms are pretty small.
Close sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and you wanna get 3 more dB. You wanna kick it up to 93 dB. Then you need to double the watts. So now you're at 2 watts. So now you're at 93. And if you want to add 3 more dB, you gotta double it again. So 4 watts
gets you 96 in this scenario. That's right. Yeah, the key to all of this is that decibels, and we always technically should be saying decibels sound pressure level, because decibels by themselves are not a complete what would you call it, unit. There has to be something attached to that. So technically we're talking about decibels of sound pressure level, but decibels are a logarithmic scale. It is decibel. So if you want to talk going from 1 bell to 2 bells, that is, because it's logarithmic, 10 times the power. It's just like the Richter scale for earthquakes, right? If you're going up by integer whole numbers, it is 10 times. It is orders of magnitude every time you go up by 1. So a decibel is it's not exactly 1/10 of a bell because it's not linear, it's on a curve, right? But it is a 1/10 section of a bell, a decibel. So as we go up there, it just so happens that to get to twice the power rather than 10 times the power is right around 3 decibels of increase gets you that twice the amount of power. So I think where people get confused is my AV receiver says it delivers 100 watts per channel. If I buy a 200 watt per channel external amplifier and power my speakers with that, does that mean my speakers are 3 decibels louder all the time? No, absolutely not. That's not what's going on. What you could do is once you get to, like, let's say, again, these speakers that are 90 decibels with 1 watt going into them, at 100 watts, right, we've added 10 decibels, 1 bell, by going up to 10 watts. So that would mean at 100 watts, that speaker is producing 110 decibels of sound pressure level. If you go to 200 watts, all right, so your AV receiver taps out at that point, doesn't have any more power to give, can't make the speakers go any louder than 110 decibels. But if you have a 200 watt amplifier, you could get to 113, assuming your speakers are capable of playing that loud. That's where the additional wattage in your amplifier makes some little bit of difference, right at the very, very tip top of the loudness of the volume. There is 3 decibels more that amplifier can supply. But if what you want is 90 decibels, it doesn't matter. Either of them only needs to supply 1 watt to these speakers to get you the 90 decibels.
In our example, yes.
Yes. In this example, whether there's 99 more decibels to 99 more watts available above that first watt, or 199 watts available in this amplifier above that first watt. In either case, with this hypothetical speaker we're talking about, to get 90 decibels, you just need the same 1 watt. That doesn't change. So I hope that explains why it's this little bit of a weird curve. Why is 3 decibels twice the power? Why is 10 decibels 10 times the power? It's because it's a logarithmic scale. Decibels is 1/10 of a bell. And I hope that explains it.
Brian's remodeling his basement, including his home theater. When he's done, the theater will be 18 by 20 with a 7.2.6 speaker configuration. So apparently, in some ways, popping for the big receiver. He used to have a bit of a Frankenstein system with in-wall RBH speakers up front, horn-loaded surrounds, and bipoles at the back. He's looking forward to having a matching set of speakers this time. He decided to go with SVS Ultra bookshelf speakers up front, along with the SVS Ultra center. He'd like our advice about which speakers to get as surrounds and surround backs. He'd like them to mount on the walls and match the aesthetics of the Ultra series speakers up front. Naturally, he's considered more pairs of Ultra bookshelves, the trapezoidal-shaped Ultra surrounds, which can run as dipoles, bipoles, or dual monopoles, or stepping down to the prime bookshelves or prime elevations or prime satellites. Both bookshelf models have ports on the back and don't really seem to be intended to mount on the wall. He figured the prime satellites are more of an on-wall option, but he isn't sure they'll look substantial enough in the room, end quote. He's worried that they might be underpowered. The prime elevations can definitely be wall-mounted, but he doesn't really need the angle design since he wants to get as close as possible to Dolby's speaker layout guidelines, the new ones, I hope. And when it comes to the Ultra surrounds, if he just mounts them to the sides of his seats, none of the drivers will actually be facing the main seats, and isn't sure they'd be the best choice for Atmos. So what do we think is the best option? I mean, okay, so let's look at how big is this room again? 18 by 20. So
it's not a small room. He's probably going to have
room.
Some decent width to the sides of his seats.
Right. Yeah. So the satellites are small. That's what I have, right? And they are rear ported as well.
There is a port on the back of those satellites. Yeah, he wasn't quite sure about that, but there is. Now, they do just have a keyhole mount, so they are quite easy to physically attach to the wall, but they do have a little teeny tiny port on the back of them there.
Yeah. Something I am exceedingly not worried about with my speakers. I put them like half an inch from the wall.
Oh, I mean, they are still
the side ones,
still fully capable of being wall mounted. That's why they gave him a keyhole mount. You will notice that on the back of the Ultra bookshelf speaker, or on the back of the Prime bookshelf speaker, there's really no hardware there for attaching them to a wall. Those are not intended to be wall mounted speakers. So you would be looking more at a shelf or maybe the side clamping wall mounts if you were to use those.
Right. So with being them, so if you're in the center, the middle seat is going to be in the center of the room, right? So it's going to be about 9 feet, right, from each wall.
Yeah.
Which is a fair distance from the side walls if you're going to have them directly to your sides.
But it's under 10 feet.
It is under 10 feet. And as far as matching the Ultra bookshelves and the Prime satellites, it's not a problem. I know they don't look like they'll keep up. They keep up fine. They don't have to make a whole lot of noise. They're just surrounds. So,
I'm picturing, he didn't say this for sure, but with 18 by 20, I'm sort of picturing that he might have 2 rows of seats. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. So you might end up with more than one pair of surround speakers on the side walls. That is certainly a possibility.
And that would be fine. With these, you could wire them in series and and half the ohmage, the resistance, whatever it's called. So and they sound perfectly good with the Ultra. So I think you can go with those and save a bit of money that way too. And I know they don't look like they. When you look at them on the website, they look very small. And when you look at them compared to the speakers like right next to them, they look quite small. But they are not a satellite speaker. They're called satellites. I would call them
stout, like they're kind of beefy little bricks. They're not lightweight, they're not.
Yeah, they're like I think they call them satellites because that's what they want, people expect to but when you get them, you're kind of looking at them and you go, this is a small bookshelf speaker.
That's
it's by any stretch of imagination, it's not a large bookshelf or even a normal size bookshelf, but it is not a satellite speaker. Like you expect a satellite speaker to be in the realm of Bose, the dual cubes stacked on top of each other. These are considerably larger.
Oh, yes, for sure. Now, there is the other thing, though, which is just pure aesthetics. Pure aesthetics. Because I will agree, in an 18 by 20 foot room, the Prime satellites just hanging on the wall on their keyhole mounts over on the side wall and maybe the back wall. Maybe you're, about halfway into this room where you're sitting. I'm like, I will say that's going to look a little bit small. Just visually speaking, you're going to look over to that side wall and go, that's kind of a small little surround speaker over there. I don't disagree with that assessment that you might feel that way. So at that point, because I agree, my inclination is just get Prime satellites because I'm not worried at all about their output capability, their extension, or their performance compared to having Ultra Series up at the front. I think they're the right choice. But if purely for visual reasons, and keep in mind this is going to cost more money, but I think he's aware of that, I think the Ultra Surrounds are the second choice, in my view, in this particular setup, because that, first of all, gets you the sort of look that we're used to with surround speakers. It's got that trapezoidal shape, it's flush on the wall, it doesn't protrude too much, it looks like what we sort of expect a surround speaker to look like. Obviously, the performance is going to match right up, because it's the exact same drivers as the Ultra Bookshelf speaker up front, and I am not concerned about the driver isn't literally facing right at you. I would, in your case, put them in bipole operation mode. That's what I would choose, because when they're run as a bipole, put away the image, put the grills on, forget about where the drivers are physically. It's just a very wide dispersion speaker at that point, when you put it in bipole mode. You don't need to put them in dipole mode. I'm actually glad that they exist and that dipole is still a possibility, because if you are in a setup where you're actually sitting very close to your side wall, being able to put them in dipole mode and sit in that null is a good benefit. I'm glad that there's that option. I don't think you're going to need to do that in the size of the room that you have. But I would operate them in bipole mode, and I would not worry one iota that the tweeter is not directly facing my head. It doesn't need to. You just have yourself a very wide dispersion surround speaker, which is going to work really nicely in your setup. So I say those are the two choices. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I think if aesthetics are a big concern, those Ultras, even though they cost more, the Ultra Surrounds might be your better choice here.
Oh, I have to scroll. Yeah. I actually, when you had in-wall RBHs, I kind of wish you still had those and just you could use those too, because they would match just fine with the Ultras. 100%. Mike has a pretty big home theater upgrade plan. He wants to end up with a 9.4.4 speaker configuration. He's quite interested in those front wide speakers he's heard so much about. Be prepared to be underwhelmed. But in trying to research them on his own, he's found such a confusing mess of misinformation. He's hoping we can sort it out.
I am the front wide guy, yeah. So this is the right place.
Rob loves them, and I will say I talked with Kurt. He tried them out and went, eh. So
yep.
I expect that to be most people's
I'm not angry at Kurt about that. It's like trying out the surround backs, and maybe you go meh.
That's hey. I'm looking for performance upgrades that make a big difference. That's what I'm looking for. So going from no surrounds to having surrounds makes a big difference. Putting surround backs, you're like, well, I mean, I guess they're doing something. And that's not what I paid money for. I don't want to have to guess that. I don't go to pay for a massage and say, I think I got a massage. I want to know I got a massage. Then that's the way I feel about my home theater. Anyways, he's seen people online saying the front wides were basically gone and they may be available only in the flagship models, and maybe they're now making a comeback. He found a used Marantz SR7010 and it has dedicated front wide outputs, but it doesn't have all the latest HDMI features. So just in general, what's the state of front wide support these days? The making a comeback is sort of where we're at.
I'd say so.
Yeah. So Audyssey, whatever, DS something X?
There was DSX, Audyssey DSX. That is pretty much gone, because even on the Denon Marantzes that do have front wides, they don't have Audyssey DSX anymore. That's
where front wides, in my mind, really started making a push through, that people started talking about front wides, and then that went away, and then nobody talked about it, and Atmos didn't support it, and DTSX
DTS Neo X was around for a hot minute and had 3 movies total ever released in the format. I own all 3 of them, of course, and then that was the end of DTS Neo X, now replaced by DTS Neural X.
Right. So now we're starting to see receivers come out that support front wides, but only in Atmos, right? There is
no, because if you have DTSX Pro, you can go beyond 11 speakers, so that is all coming into place now. What we're really seeing, most of all, like, we're talking about what is the state of front wide speakers these days and support for front wide speakers in AV receivers. We're seeing it in the models that can do more than 11 speakers. We're not really seeing front wide support in AV receivers that do 11 speakers maximum or fewer. And I think that's maybe where some of the confusion comes in, because, like, for example, that Marantz SR7010, 9 amplifiers built in, can process a maximum of 11 speakers, has the option of using front wides as 2 out of those 11 speakers. We're not seeing front wides as an option in 11 speaker AV receiver models. You have to get to the one that could do 13 or 15 speakers. So that's sort of the state where we're in right now. But there are now more and more AV receivers and processors that are going beyond 11 speakers, and that's where we're seeing the front wide support come back.
Right. So the most expensive processors and receivers that are out there,
it tends to be, because it's not the entry level that's doing 13. That's for darn sure.
So, anyways, the question you're probably going to ask, if you haven't already asked it, is when will those come down to lower, cheaper models? Now, and the answer is, I don't know that it will, and I don't even know that when the cheaper models, the less expensive receivers that will eventually come out to support things like 3 sets of overhead speakers, 3 pairs of overhead speakers, or more 9 more speakers on the ground, or
taking
whatever.
One that can do 11 speakers total and having it do 5.1.6 rather than saying you have to stop at 4, right? Like that's a programming thing. There isn't really much technical reason why you shouldn't be able to assign 11 speakers as 5.1.6 rather than 7.1.4, or if you have 5, you have to stop at 5.1.4. You can't use those last 2. So things like that would be programming. But when it comes to price, there is Emotiva's MC1 Pre-Pro. $1,000 can do 13 speakers. It can do 9.1.4. It can do that, or 7.1.6, which is what our last listener wanted to do. So those options are coming down in price. But will we see front wide support in $1,000 or less AV receivers? would doubt that strongly. I don't think it's getting that kind of traction.
So he's read that Dolby upgraded their Dolby Surround up mixers to be able to utilize front wides. What's the situation with that? Yes, they did for these processors that have
Dolby did, but a lot of AV receivers that are on the market right now didn't upgrade to do that.
Right.
Denon and Marantz did. I'm not going to firmly say that they're the only ones that did, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they were the only ones that did, because we haven't seen that update happen on a lot of other AV receivers and processors that were already on the market. Now, going forward, I would expect we would see more new models that are going to be coming out, after this pause that went across the industry because of the pandemic. The new models coming out in the near future and after that, I would sort of expect to see the Dolby Surround up mixer be the latest version that will utilize front wides. But right this second, if you're buying an AV receiver right today, I would say stick to the Denon and Marantz. Otherwise, I'm not certain at all that the Dolby Surround up mixer is going to use front wides.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. He's heard some processors being able to matrix sounds into front wide speakers, even if the native up mixers, the Dolby Surround or DTS Neural X, don't do it. What's the difference between so-called native front wide support versus non-native? So the Dolby Surround up mixer, the Dolby Atmos, is object-based, right? So
if it's actual Dolby Atmos, yes.
Yeah, it utilizes whatever speakers in whatever positions you tell it to. Everything else is just essentially some sort of algorithm that says, oh, this sound is supposed to be coming more from here than from there. Therefore, I'll put it closer to this speaker that you now have told me that you have versus not having that. So like going from 2 surround speakers to surround and surround back speakers, those speakers in the back suddenly are able to, when a sound is supposed to be panning across the back of the room, those surround back speakers will get those sounds matrixed into there.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what it comes down to.
The so-called non-native, and this would be like Monoprice's HTP1. It has this quote-unquote non-native support for front wide speakers. It will take what was set up as an 11-channel setup, and it will matrix front wides itself. It will create them itself and have sounds for the front wides. That's almost exactly the same as having a stereo setup and matrixing a center right between it. That's what it's doing. It's saying, is there equal information in the surround left and the front left speaker? If there's equal information, then I'm going to put that into a phantom, or now a matrixed left front wide speaker. That's what it's going to do. And, the relative amounts of volume and delays, it's going to work exactly like matrixing a center speaker between your front left and right. It's just going to do that as a front wide. That is more or less what DTS Neural X does when you have a setup with Neural X that supports front wides. That's more or less what it does with its front wides. Dolby Surround up mixer is the one where it's the most subtle by far. You put your ear right up to those front wides, and sometimes there's some sounds coming out of them, but it is hard to notice when the rest of the speakers are playing. It is by far the most subtle, similar to its treatment of overhead speakers versus the way that DTS Neural X puts quite a bit too much information into the overheads, playing too loudly, but therefore you notice it more. So there is a bit more subtlety going on with the Dolby Surround up mixer use of front wides. The other ones are pretty much just straight matrixing like you would a center.
Okay. How do you tell if a given receiver model supports front wides? Would they always be specifically mentioned in the manual, or is it a case where, say, one of the height channel pairs could be reassigned as front wides, or could the front wides have been added as an option via firmware update? Well, nothing has been updated versus firmware updates that I'm aware of as of this time.
No, I mean, these are all reasonable ideas, but as it is today, that isn't what
say 9 point something, then it doesn't do front
That's
wides.
Right, yeah. Front wides will be specifically mentioned in the manual if it's supported. You will almost certainly see on the back, on the binding posts. It'll often be where those binding posts can be reassigned, like maybe it can be zone 3 or front wides, or it can be height channel 3, like top middles or front wides. You'll see that, but you will see front wides specifically mentioned. It's not going to be a case where, like I say, you buy an 11 channel AV receiver and there's somehow an ability to use front wides with it. No, it will be specifically mentioned.
And he says, I think we already answered this, will front wides be an assignable option on future AV receiver models, or will there always have to be dedicated outputs for them? I mean, I think that if we do see it trickle down to some of these lower priced ones, you're going to be able to assign some channels to front wides if you
Which
so
is
decide.
kind of the way it used to be. like going back to that SR7010. It'll still be clearly marked whether front wides are supported whatsoever. But honestly, I think the way we're going is it will... my prediction, this is just a prediction.
Yes.
It's my prediction that it will remain the ones that can do more than 11. It's the 13, the 15, the ones that can do 9.1.4 or 9.1.6, or we might be getting new ones that can go all the way to 11.1.8, right? Those are the ones that are going to have front wide support. I'm not really predicting we're going to see it in 11 channels and fewer.
What formats actually utilize front wides? Again, any object-based format should be able to. Now, whether that DTS will support it or not, or at the receiver level you're looking at, any object-based one. Will his receiver automatically switch to the correct format to always make use of them, or will he need to manually activate them somehow? Well, I mean, it'll be like everything else, right? So if there is an up mixer that utilizes them, then you will. When you're on that input, you will turn it on one time, and it will remember that for that audio codec that's coming in. And then when a different audio codec comes in, you'll have to do it again and keep doing that until you've got them all. and then you'll never have to switch it again. And then for the ones that utilize them natively, like theoretically Atmos and DTSX, you would just put auto or through or whatever
Dolby Atmos DTSX, I mean, that's going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to have your receiver in that decoding mode, and if there are objects in the soundtrack that go through the front wide position, they'll play out of the front wides. If there's no sounds ever mixed into those positions, your front wides might be sitting there silent, because there are plenty of movies where they just never put any objects that go through the front wide position, and it's not going to magically create sounds for those. But you're just playing back what the signal said to do in the case of Dolby Atmos and DTSX. For the up mixers, what I was thinking is maybe he was wondering, like, could I upmix to just the 9 floor level and not also upmix to the overhead speakers? There's no way to separate those. It's going to be the Dolby Surround upmixer or the DTS Neural X upmixer, and they are going to upmix to all the speakers you have available, including the overheads. You're not going to be able to separate the floor level from the overhead level.
He's mostly seen front wide support specifically mentioned in Denon and Rant's models, but he's looking at more expensive options like from the likes of Anthem, Arcane, and JBL Synthesis. Sometimes they're mentioned, sometimes they're not. What does he need to look for, and how would it work with these higher price models? It should work exactly the same as what we just said.
Yeah, you got to look for more than 11 speakers, honestly. If it's more than 11 speakers supported, it'll support front wides pretty much. Yeah. That's it.
Gabriel.
I would imagine Gabriel.
Gabriel says he finally got his dual subwoofers dialed in, so now he's looking for his next upgrade. He has a Ben QHT 2050A projector, and he's been using it with an 84-inch Elite Screens pull-down screen. Turns out that screen never, ever gets retracted. Shocking. So he'd like to switch to a fixed frame screen and increase the screen size. He says his room is pretty well light controlled, and the screen is positioned between 2 windows, which are covered with blackout curtains. There's almost exactly 90 inches of space between the 2 windows. When he looks up the dimensions of affordable fixed frame screens, the standard 100-inch screen sizes are just a bit too wide by literally 1 or 1.5 inches. Sorry, I had a hard time reading that. He doesn't want to come all the way down to 92 inches, but he doesn't want to pay the increased price for a custom screen size. He feels he is handy enough to build a frame himself, so he could get just the screen from fabric from Karl's place and make his own, but he's wondering if there's a good screen paint option. I wrote an article about this, and I will tell you right now, I would if you think you can build a frame, I would do that 1,000 times out of 10. Because
before the paint, I agree. The paint
is, people are like, I can paint all the time. What's the big deal? Yeah, it's like painting glue. It's super thick, and you got to get it really smooth, and you got to make sure your wall is already completely flat.
The amount of labor cost that goes into it, not worth it in my opinion.
I mean, it is so much more work than you think it is.
Now, that is for the people who are very nitpicky about the image quality, because there are people who do just kind of roll the paint onto their wall and like, this looks great. This looks amazing. Yeah. I don't know if that fits you, but it's not us. We are not happy with the results, and it's way too much labor for those end results. So
he's open to suggestions if there's a better option than that. So suggestions. My suggestion is if you are at all handy, I would mount some 2x4s to the wall so that it comes up so that your screen can be mounted to those 2x4s, which would then float in front of your windows slightly.
There's that option.
And I would call it a day, because I will tell you, you already got blackout curtains on either side. You just tuck the blackout curtains in between, behind, and it just melds into there. If it's only an inch and a half overhang, how is it going to the screen? You might even go to an
even larger screen size. You might go to a 110 or a 120 at that point.
The screen size itself is going to still be between the two windows.
Right.
Like, that's the only thing you care about. Like, the black should just meld into your blackout curtains, provided that they are actually black. If they're not, it's a lot cheaper to buy a couple of blackout curtains. Black blackout curtains than to do this other thing. I mean, there is no world in which I wouldn't do that. Like,
I cannot disagree. That would be $230 from Silver Ticket for their standard fixed frame screen at the 100-inch size. Now, it is 91.9 inches wide, like including the frame.
Yeah.
It's 91.9 inches wide. So when you say he's got pretty much exactly 90 inches, that's where 1.5 inches is how that doesn't quite fit. That's probably what he was looking at. Now, Silver Ticket, just in case, because I agree with Tom, I think if you're handy at all, that is probably the best solution and the least expensive solution. But Silver Ticket does have a thin bezel option for the 100-inch screen size. With the thin bezel, it is 88 inches wide. So it is literally half an inch, I think, wider than the screen itself, right? It's like 1/4-inch bezels. That's how thin the bezels are on it. But it is twice the price. It is $460 for the 100-inch screen size from Silver Ticket with their thin bezel with the 88-inch total width. So, if it were me, because I'm not particularly handy and I don't want to put in the 2x4s and make them look nice at the front of my wall, I might just spend double the price, because it's still $460. We're not into thousands of dollars here. We're not even over $500. We're at $460, and it's just a frame that I hang on my wall. I might personally go for that. I think some other listeners might personally go for that, because the price increase isn't outlandish, but you can definitely still
a lot more than
it's still a lot more than $230 and a couple of 2x4s. So I agree with Tom, but I'm just saying that option is there, because if you weren't aware that Silver Ticket also has those thin bezel options, just to make you aware that they do have them.
Okay. I clicked on the wrong thing. Dale is helping out a friend with the projector upgrade decision. He shared our thoughts from a few weeks ago. Now his friend has made a couple of decisions, probably all wrong. Oh my God. The amount of time people focus on like the totally wrong thing. It just
I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that.
But I'm not saying that that's what's happening here. I haven't read the question. It doesn't matter. Like, I know exactly as much as you, the listener, know. Okay? Because I am reading these questions for the very first time. But I will tell you the amount of times I see somebody ask a question and then get an answer and then they focus on the exact wrong thing is highly amusing to me. So he definitely wants 4K and HDR, so he's going to spend some money. And he really, really wants lasers, not a lamp. I don't agree with that.
There we go, because we were kind of saying if you're willing to spend upwards of $7,000, then that JVC NP5, which is 4K and it is HDR and it looks spectacular and has a motorized lens and all the really nice features.
All the things.
At $7,000, which is expensive, but is not into the $10,000 plus realm, but it uses a lamp. It does not use lasers. So that's that.
Dale's heard us enough to know that we like the JVC's best and for their black levels and HDR performance, but clearly if it's lasers only, that gets pricey right away.
It does.
So his friend has narrowed down exactly what he wants a bit. Can we offer a fresh take on his best options, and where should he go for the best price? Well, we were just talking about this the other day, where you go to Projector Central. Is that right? No, Projector
for reviews.
What's it called?
Well, I would say AV Science. I would say talk to the guys at AV Science.
The AV Science, you call them up and you say,
call them.
Yeah, you call them. That's the important bit.
Yeah, because the prices listed on their website are pretty much just MSRP, but call them, talk to them about it. They can also help you with this decision quite properly. But yeah, I'm happy to recommend them. I'm going to include a link here to Projector Central to their Sony XW5000 review, because that is one of the options that you're going to be faced with. And they reference pretty much all the other options that we're going to talk about here. So that's another place that you can read about them to read about those options. But yeah, like, we don't know exactly how much this friend of Dale's is willing to pay. So I'm just going to go from bottom to top, the ones that I would point out to you. And some of these are repeats from what we mentioned before. But Epson's LS12000, it's $5,000. That's kind of the low. There is the LS11000 at $4,000, but its black levels are not quite as deep as the LS12000. So for the dedicated theater, the setup, really wanting to go whole hog, I think you can sort of justify the $1,000 extra for that LS12000 with the ultra black levels from what Epson calls ultra black. Now, it does use native 1080p resolution panels, but it uses each of those panels 4 times per frame to give you true 4K resolution. All the pixels really are on the screen. There's no missing any pixels in the 4K resolution, and it can do 4K 120. So it can go all the way up to the latest standards for your games. Rated at 2700 lumens, Projector Central measured it once you've actually dialed it into accurate colors and everything, and it's right around 2000. There's a legitimate 2000 lumens that can come out of that thing, which is bright. That is pretty darn bright, especially for that price point. It does not do 3D. So if you want 3D support, it is not available in the Epson LS12000. And as far as how it handles HDR, it has a 16-step slider that you can use while you're watching content. It does not have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, but they do have a scene adaptive gamma, which is basically just dynamic contrast. It'll make blacks look blacker and whites look whiter if you activate it. It reaches 93% of DCI-P3, which is pretty darn good. So the next step up from there in terms of price is that Sony XW5000 that sells for $6,000. That's MSRP, but that is the price point. It does have native 3840 by 2160 ultra high definition panel resolution. There's no pixel shifting going on. It's just the 4K resolution right away, but it only goes up to 4K 60. It does not support 4K 120. Just doesn't have HDMI 2.1, so it stops at 4K 60. It will do 120 frames per second at 1080p. So you could game at 1080p 120, but not 4K 120 with the Sony. Manual lens, no motorized lens on this XW5000. Now, if you've got a single screen size and you're never moving it around and you're willing to, apparently the dials on it are a bit like uninspiring, but you just have to bear through it and dial it in once if you got the fixed screen size. But yeah, manual lens on that thing. So for $6,000, that seems a bit chintzy to me. 2000 lumens is what it's rated as. It actually gets pretty darn close to that, according to the reviews. It's like 1800, 1900 lumens for real. No 3D. So just like the Epson, does not do 3D. Sony has a confusing thing they call their dynamic HDR enhancer, which is not frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. It uses the metadata, it tone maps, and then it applies frame-by-frame processing after that initial tone map has been done. Epson's scene adaptive gamma is a pretty similar thing. But color, surprisingly, measured at 85% of P3. It's not really getting the full wide color. 85% of P3. Now, that NP5 that we mentioned, it is the lamp-based one. It is $7,000, so we're going up by sort of $1,000 increments. Pretty darn close, gets about 90% of P3. It has the motorized lens. It's kind of the one I like best, because now we're into JVC, and it has frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. But apparently, if it doesn't have lasers, he doesn't want it. So my favorite choice out of these is apparently nixed. You either have to go down or go up. So going up, you would stick with JVC. You'd have to go all the way up to the NZ7 at $11,000. Huge price jump all of a sudden here. And really, that's just to get lasers. That's all it is. And in fact, when they measured it, the P3 color of the NZ7 is about 85%. It's about similar to that Sony, the $6,000 Sony XW5000 in terms of wide color support, not as wide as the $7,000 NP5. All else is about equal. Light output, black levels, contrast, has the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, but you're paying $4,000 just for the lasers and actually slightly less wide color. Sony's next step up, their XW6000, that's $1,000 more than the JVC NC7. It's $12,000. It does have a better lens than the XW5000. It does have a motorized lens. It is the brightest out of this bunch so far. 2,500 lumens is the spec, and it really does pump out like 2,200 lumens. And it has 3D support. So the JVCs, the XW6000 from Sony, they get you your 3D back, but we're into $11,000, $12,000. So
all for a frickin' laser. I just don't see how it's worth it.
I'm like, the NP5, it remains my choice. If you can convince your friend that lasers are not necessary, it has all the things I really care about. It has that frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, which makes HDR look considerably better than anything that doesn't have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. It has the wider color other than everything under $16,000. It has the widest color. It does 4K 120. It will even support 8K sources, although it will wobble twice per frame, not 4 times per frame. But like, the MP5 remains my choice. Try and convince your friend that he doesn't actually need lasers, and that's where I'll leave it.
Like I said, people get focused on the wrong things. And here is an example.
Lasers is what the focus is.
Lasers was the focus, and I am telling you, I just can't get behind it yet. I want to. I'm like you. I want lasers. Sure. I think lasers are cool sounding. I mean, you basically, as far as I'm concerned, and until someone proves me wrong, you have to throw away that projector if that laser goes.
I mean, that probably will be 8 to 10 years from now, but yes.
Depending on how much you use it.
Depending on how much you use it, yeah.
Yeah, it might be a long time, but I don't like the idea that I have to throw away my projector just because the light source goes out. If it's your primary
display and you use it a lot every day and it's 4 or 5 years from now, $11,000 is just getting replaced? That's a lot.
That's a lot. Jonathan in the CDEN 4.0. Jonathan has his Sony VW325ES projector professionally calibrated by a fully ISF certified and reputable calibrator. For his Apple TV 4K, the match dynamic range setting was enabled, and his Sony projector was set to use the medium setting of its dynamic HDR enhancer. Sure enough, whenever HDR content is played, an HDR flag appears on the screen to let him know his projector has switched into HDR mode. That's always nice. A little thing.
Little confirmation.
For physical discs, he has a Panasonic UBA20 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. His calibrator set to output SDR BT2020 for his HDR content, and with the HDR display type set to basic luminance. With this setting, his Sony does not go into HDR mode when HDR content is played. He had a discussion with his calibrator about it, but he insisted this is the best way to set things up. With these particular components, he says the Panasonic player does a better job of tone mapping for Ultra HD Blu-rays, and that Sony's dynamic HDR enhancer is a bit misleading. I feel like I think we talked about that before.
We kind of just mentioned it.
Jonathan has no complaints about the way movies look, but he would just like to understand these settings a little bit better. What is the theory behind keeping the projector in SDR mode even for HDR content? Is he still seeing HDR even though there's no HDR flag on his projector? I don't know. Rob, fix it.
Right. So, yeah, this is a bit confusing. I'm not gonna say your calibrator is wrong. I'm certainly not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say it is.
He's going to hint at it really strongly, though.
No. I'm not going to say it is always. What he did is very okay. Very, very okay, in my opinion, to have set it up to output at the player, to output it as SDR with the wider BT 2020 color gamut, rather than letting it output the HDR signal and having the Sony projector kick itself into its HDR mode. So, I think we need to maybe start with tone mapping a little bit, right? Because we know for a fact your projector is not producing 10,000 lumen or 10,000 nits. Not even close to that. None of our things are. And it's certainly not getting close to 1,000 nits either. So things have to be tone mapped for sure. Let's imagine that you just take an HDR source, put it into your Sony, and let the Sony do its thing, right? What's going to happen? The Sony is set up to tone map 1000 nit content pretty well. It does a pretty darn good job of that. What I mean by that is it doesn't like throw away a bunch of highlight detail or something like that. It doesn't just clip it all off. It does a pretty good job at retaining most of that. Once that initial tone map of the 1000 nit metadata has been done, so you can optionally activate Sony's dynamic HDR enhancer, which, like I say, kind of makes the darks darker and the brights brighter, increases your perceived contrast of things. And it does that on a frame-by-frame basis, but it can't, like, bring back detail that was clipped off or bring shadow detail that, isn't in the signal or something like that. Where the Sony falls down a bit is if you are inputting a signal that has any information above 1000 nits, that all gets clipped off. It's just gone. So, and there's no getting it back. There's no frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping in the Sony. So that's the hit or miss. Most content is mastered to 1000 nits. The Sony does a pretty good job of not throwing away that detail. You can choose whether you kind of want to boost the highs and lows with that dynamic HDR enhancer. So the Panasonic, confusingly, it does not do dynamic tone mapping. It is not ignoring the metadata on the disc and frame by frame analyzing it. What the Panasonic does is tone map. Yeah. It tone maps to a
level that
something
you
that you set it at. Yeah. And when you set it to the basic luminance setting, that's the lowest setting available. It's basically tone mapping everything down to 500 nits. That's what it's doing. But it is relying on the metadata on the disk. So if the metadata on the disk is wrong or incomplete, then sometimes what comes out of the Panasonic is actually a little bit darker than it truly needs to be, because the Panasonic's like, well, I'm not sure if there's information above 1000 nits. I'm going to assume there might be, so it reserves a little bit of extra headroom and everything gets a little bit darker. So when you're setting the Panasonic like this to actually output SDR, what it's really doing there is HDR to SDR conversion. It is converting the HDR signal to SDR. It is doing so based on the assumption that it first tone mapped, in this case, everything to 500 nits, and then converting that down to SDR. So it's doing even further conversion. The Sony, for all intents and purposes, if the Panasonic wasn't in the signal chain, has to do a similar thing because it can produce maybe about 100 nits, right? It's not 500, it's not 1,000. It's going to have to do some kind of conversion. So all you're doing is choosing where is the conversion happening, right? Is the player doing it or is the Sony doing it? And I am not going to disagree with your calibrator. The Panasonic does a really good job. So if he's saying in his experience, there's a couple of reasons why this makes sense. A, you're just choosing where it happens. It's going to happen somewhere. We're choosing where it happens. He's like, in my experience, the Panasonic actually does it a little bit better than the Sony does. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. B, it prevents you from having all the switching between formats in your projector, right? You're not going to have the blanking of the screen. You're not going to have that momentary wait where it has to re-signal lock, and occasionally there are like little signal things. It just stays in SDR mode the whole time. It just stays there, and it's like, yeah, I can play this back, no problem. I don't have to switch modes. I don't have to change lamp modes. I don't have to change picture modes. I just stay where I am, and you avoid all the little signal blanking and things like that. So end result, I think your calibrator is on the money. I don't think you have anything to worry about. Are you still watching HDR even though your projector is not in HDR mode? Well, you're watching HDR content that has been converted down to the capabilities of your projector. And like I say, that's going to have to happen somewhere. We just let the player do it instead of let the projector do it. And the end result is going to be very, very similar, but yeah, I think your calibrator did a good job in this instance. Hopefully that explains it.
All right, last question here, hopefully. I don't know how long this thing is. Is it?
It's fairly long, yeah.
Aaron in Alaska. Aaron has a split-level house, and unfortunately the lower level got water damaged. But he used it as an opportunity to gut the 2 rooms and bring the house more up to date. He had his previous home theater set up in the spare bedroom. Now that it's gutted, he won't be reinstalling the closet that was next to the door, so it can pretty much be a perfect rectangle now, 10 by 16 feet. The door is on the back wall in the right-hand corner, and there is one window in the middle of the left wall. Okay? Yep. Yep, looks like a room. He is only going to have 2 seats in here, a pair of leather recliners. The entire right wall will be shelves for his disc collection, but he's fine with including space within those shelves for acoustic treatments and the right surround speaker. He also wants to fit a desk at the back of the room. In his previous setup, he had a 77-inch OLED on a TV stand, the Denon X3700H receiver, but just a 5.1 speaker setup using Pioneer Andrew Jones front towers and center with M&K surrounds, the single SVS PC2000 cylinder sub. He wants to switch to having the TV wall mounted and the bookshelf front speakers to free up a bit more room at the front. Gear can then go below the TV and a gear stand in the left corner, while his cylinder sub goes in the front right corner. He tends to get a second sub and go in the rear left corner. So does the subwoofer placement plan sound right? And would a PC2000 Pro cylinder be the best option these days to pair with his existing PC2000? He knows it's overkill for his room size, but he's very happy with the one he has. And the other subwoofer suggestions, I would say you're fine. I mean, you could get something else, but the floor space is fine. I mean, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, you definitely have more output capability with those 2 subs. The PC 2000 Pro even slightly more so than the PC 2000, although not drastically.
As far as matching, they'll be fine.
Those will match wonderfully well together, and I think your plan of front right corner, rear left corner makes a whole lot of sense, and those cylinders will stand in there quite nicely.
So what should the speaker configuration be? He's got the Denon X3700H already, so it's full 7.2.4 configuration is possible. What was the size again? Let me look back up.
10 by 16. It's a small room. It's a narrow room.
He's only got the 2 seats though, so he's gonna be sitting probably maybe 5 feet off the back wall.
Well, if he's staying with the 77-inch OLED and the 77-inch OLED is wall-mounted, he might actually be in front of the halfway point of this room, potentially. It's possible. I would be.
I mean, you could make the case for 7 point whatever, but I'd be honest with 5 point, I think you'd be fine. 5.2.4 would be where I would go, but you can definitely make the case for the two surround back speakers.
He wants a desk on the back wall, so his seats are clearly not going on the back wall.
Yeah.
Like I say, if you're sticking with the 77-inch, like I would be sitting 7 feet away from that 77-inch. So, you would actually have a bit more of the room. You'd have 9 feet behind you, or 8 or 9 feet behind you, and 7 feet in front of you, or something like that. So yeah, I think 7.2.4 is quite reasonable in this room if you didn't want to add any external 2-channel amp to your X3700H because it has 9 amplifiers built in, not 11. And if you just didn't want to add those 2 extra channels of amplification and therefore you stop at 5.2.4, I think you will be very, very okay stopping at 5.2.4. But if you really want to add those surround backs, I would say it's reasonable in here because I think you'll have the room behind you.
Did I read the Dolby one already?
Nope, we're on that one.
Dolby's site's got him a bit confused. There's so many Atmos setups listed. So where exactly should all of his speakers go? In his previous 5.1 setup, he had his surround speakers behind him and raised. But for Atmos, that doesn't seem to be a recommendation anymore. Where should they go? They're fine. You could put them right where they were before. You could put them directly to your sides.
I'm not sure if he had them on the back wall before, because many people did, right? Many people in 5.1, because he just said he had them behind him, and I'm not sure how far behind him.
Right.
So your surround speakers should be on the side walls. We'll say that much. If in your previous setup they were on the back wall, we don't want your surround speakers on the back wall. We want them on the side wall. They don't necessarily have to go shown in the diagram directly 90 degrees to your left and right. In fact, we don't really like that. Dolby's own guidelines say when you have a 7.2.4 configuration, and like we're saying, that's actually reasonable in here, your surround speakers are anywhere between 90 to 110 degrees to your sides. So that means either straight to your sides, which we probably wouldn't do, or a little bit behind you, right? A foot behind you. That's kind of what we would do. And thankfully, Dolby has even updated their thing now on at least their website, if not in the white paper yet, saying you want to be able to see your speakers. If there is something blocking your vision from your seat to the speaker, then the speaker is also obstructed in sending its sound to you. So if that means raising the speaker a little bit, which it usually does if you have someone sitting beside you, then they're like, yeah, raise it about a foot. So we're like, go straight to your side at ear level, go back about a foot, go up about a foot, and that's where I would put your surround speaker.
Yeah, just and Rob's right, because I tried to find it on the white paper. It's not there.
It might get updated.
It might get updated when they finally update the date. But as of now, it's not up there. It is on their website. It does say something along the lines of, clear line of sight or something.
Yeah,
we should have gotten credit, but
it's allowed for 1.25 times the height of your front speakers, which is a foot, right? An 8-foot room, 4 foot high. That means 5 feet. So that's it for the surrounds. For the surround backs, now I can see if you do that, if you're strictly trying to follow the guidelines, right? You might be saying, well, this room is already quite narrow. Obviously, I'm not going to put the surround back speaker on the door. So if I put it, just inside the door and then symmetrically on the other side, they're going to be kind of narrower together than what it shows in the Dolby diagram. That is fine. It is absolutely fine for your surround back speakers.
They're so far
to
back
be
there,
a little
and you can't
bit
really
narrower.
locate them anyways.
They're supposed to. Yeah. If you notice that there is a hole in the sound behind you, fill that in. They're supposed to be behind you. So don't worry too much that you might be not quite at the, 155 degree azimuth mark, right? That you're actually a little bit farther than that. Totally fine for the surround backs. Again, clear line of sight. So that might mean elevating them to 5 or 5.5 feet to clear the back of your seat. That's really all we're caring about.
So lastly, he'd like an upgrade over his current speakers, and as mentioned, to switch to bookshelf fronts. One thing to keep in mind is that shipping to Alaska isn't always free or easy. Accessories for less, for example, won't even ship there. But SVS will. So should he just go for an all SVS speaker setup? Would that be an upgrade over his Pioneers? Should he get the Prime series or the Ultras? I mean, it's very easy for me to say, get the Ultras up front and the Prime satellites all the way around. And maybe
Prime elevations for your 4 Atmos speakers, because that would be a very nice, convenient way to set things up. And a room this size, that's going to work really, really well.
You will have no problems powering those speakers with any receiver. In the 3700H, it's going to be just fine.
Output-wise, he definitely doesn't need Ultras up front.
No.
But is there enough of a quality difference? That tweeter upgrade, that mid-range driver upgrade in the center?
I mean, you can make the argument for primes. I don't know they're going to be a huge upgrade over the Andrew Jones. They are going to be upgrade. I don't know that you're immediately going to go, wow, this is so much better.
Yeah, I mean, the Pioneer
I really
Andrew
think the
Jones,
second subwoofer is going to make the bigger difference.
The Pioneer Andrew Jones, I love them. I think they're tremendous value. They do have a high frequency roll-off because they opted for, rather than them ever potentially sounding harsh, let's make sure they always play nice. So there's definitely more high frequency detail to be had. The SVSs can get you there. Yeah, I'm kind of tempted to go, like he's going full dedicated room, really wants to experience hey, everything's matching. First of all, I think SVS is a great choice. If they ship there and so maybe a splurge and you get yourself the 3 Ultras at the front, Ultra bookshelves, Ultra center, and then definitely Prime satellites as your surrounds and surround backs, Prime elevations as your Atmos speakers. I think that's a tremendous choice.
My only other recommendation would be I have no clue what else ships cheaply or can be found locally. So it is always worth your time to go to your local, if there are big box stores where you live.
Sure.
Like, Magnolia or Best Buy or whatever they might have up there, or, dedicated hi-fi shops, to just go see what they've got, because there's going to be open boxes, there's going to be other options that may be available that you can get that would be a better value. I don't know how much extra SVS charges to ship up there,
right,
but it might be considerable. We've said that before in this podcast, where we love SVS, but if your shipping is going to be too much, well, then don't. There are other values to be had. So I would definitely check those out. But of the options that you gave us, which was 1, we are okay with that one option.
Very okay. And I mean, SVS does sell in Best Buy, and there are Best Buys in Alaska. So that is another way, even if the shipping is something, they're readily available just at Best Buys. I agree with all that. I think you'll have a really nice setup.
You save the money with the satellites and the elevations.
Yeah.
That's where you save the money, and then you splurge a little bit on. I mean, honestly, if you said I'm going to sell my PC 2000 and get a couple of SB 1000s for this room, you could do that. I mean, and maybe help finance all this thing,
right?
Because the PC 2000s are 100,000% overkill for this room.
Right.
I mean, as somebody who has the equivalent speaker in a room that's bigger than what you have, I am telling you, you will never turn them up as loud as you think you might. And you know this already from the one that you have.
Oh, yeah.
And putting 2 in there is just going to make them more even, and you'll play a little bit louder. I mean, you could definitely sell that, get the SB1000 Pros, and call it a day. But anyways, who do we have left, Rob?
Doug and Carolyn have questions in here. I think, in fact, just so people aren't worried there, I will email them just so that they can get some of the sales on the TVs that I'm going to mention, because there are TVs I'm going to mention that are on sale as we're recording this, and that might be gone away in some time. So yes, Doug and Carolyn and Jack, that is on the list for next week.
All right. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Raph for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 138 patrons over at patreon.com, including Dale and Aaron.
Yeah. Thank you, Raph, for the PayPal donation. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 138 patrons, Dale and Aaron. Thank you for being 2 of them.
Thanks to Kurt for taking me to lunch, and Martin for sending us a digital movie code for Dread.
Yeah, Tim as well. Tim gave us a shout out to Accessories for Less.
Oh, sorry, I scrolled past that. Sorry, Tim.
No problem. Thank you, Tim. Also, listener of the week, Kurt, thanks for treating Tom to lunch. And Martin, thanks for the digital movie code. I will check if that is redeemable outside of Ireland.
All right. Doug and Carol sent me some photos to use on AV Gadgets. So.
You did it
Carol
again.
What is wrong with this name? I read it right below. Carolyn. Sorry, Carolyn.
Such an unusual name. So long. So many.
No one's ever been
Tom.
named this. You get 2 syllables and I'm done.
That's right.
Carolyn. It's too much.
Thank you, Doug and Carolyn, for
what
giving
is my
permission
problem?
to use
That's
those
so
photos.
funny. I'm looking at it. It has a clearly defined Y and an N at the end. I just get to L and it just drops off.
That's right. We're done.
Doug, you got to start calling her Carol now, because so I don't feel so bad. We also want to thank those who send us notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. From Tim, Brian, Dale, scrolling, Jonathan, Aaron, Doug, and Carolyn. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, I'll say the names one more time. Tim, Brian, Dale, Jonathan, Aaron, Doug, and Carolyn. Thank you very much for sending us those notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. The notes of encouragement are super appreciated. So big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.